morning, everyone. Welcome to, well, I guess you could call it Wet Wednesday in, conjunction with Wet Monday, because my rain has now turned to snow. And I'm sure, Kerri, your snow is now turned to rain.
Actually, no, we have clear skies today. So it should be up in the 60s today, sunny. It's beautiful. Sorry, Andy, you're on your own.
I'm not playing anymore.
Oh no, but it is what it is. It's just it'll be a lovely join me.
Oh yes, sure. I'm sure if I drove really fast, they'd just open the border for me so I could drive across.
Well, that's true. Like, Americans can't go north, but I think Canadians can still come south so long as you've got all your Trump 2020 gear ready to go. They should just wave you right through. No problem.
Yeah, okay. Woo.
Right. So this morning we wanted to talk about an issue that is bubbled up in California. And for those people who are looking at this saying, well, I don't live in California, this doesn't matter. I'm like, oh, yes, it does. Because what is happening in California is happening in other parts of the country and may have already taken over a city near you, and you just don't realize it. So we want to talk about this today. We were hoping to get a guest on from the Teamsters from local 1932. They may be sleeping in this morning, so we'll keep an eye out and see if they're able to connect with us. But the reason we wanted to have them on is they seem to be at the forefront of this fight against Prop 22 as a union organization. So who better to have on for this particular show than that group? But despite that, there's so much to talk about, especially in light of the late night confirmation of now Supreme Court Justice Amy Barrett. People are losing their shit over this and talking about we're going to lose all our rights. Well, Andy, you and I have been talking about this for weeks, that if you don't want to leave it to the interpretation of a justice, even at the Supreme Court, change the law, write better laws. I mean, seems pretty simple, don't you think?
Well, yeah, of course. And it's a way to distract, right? Like, I mean, if we know that the Democrats are, trying to scare the hell out of people to voting for them, although, our opinion on Democrats, our favorite party, that this can be used as a scare tactic, right? Just like their entire Russia narrative and Orange Man bad, and now, conservative judges bad, right? You just pile up on you that say that, well, you don't have a choice. Right?
Well, yeah, every election is so dire and life-threatening and everything else. And you've got to have, these are the new wedge issues, right? So we've got a repeat of women's reproductive rights under Roe versus Wade being of threat, LGBT marriage equality, and a bunch of civil rights, particularly in the Voting Rights Act that has been gutted largely over the last 4 or 5 years. So all of these things, while important, the obvious solution seems to elude corporate media and the narrative, and it's really not helping people to educate themselves and how basic civics works. So here we have an example of Prop 22, where the corporations are themselves taking this example and trying to change the law because they got a ruling from a judge recently that they didn't like. So rather than go through the courts, they're going to change the law. And they're spending millions to convince voters in California that this is the right way to go. So let's talk about that, what their argument is, what they're actually doing, and what it means for not only the people of California, but everyone across this country, right? So the reason why this particular program is about workers' rights is because the fundamental nature of this argument, one side, the corporations are trying to make an employee a temporary worker, a contractor. and the employees themselves and the state of California trying to protect workers in the free market, creating that free market, trying to have that monopoly protection, is saying, no, you can't do that to employees. So this particular argument also crosses over into the excuse that people give for not wanting something like Medicare for all. Well, you can get your insurance through your employer. Well, here are millions of drivers for Uber and Lyft who are being told that you are not an employee. You do not get workers' rights. You do not get the protections of an employee in a corporation and that type of contract. You are an independent contractor. You're on your own, no benefits, no protections, nothing. So that is what this particular argument is about and why it's so important. So, Andy, let's start with you. You worked for a major corporation as a union member. How awful was that?
Well, it's kind of a tale of two stories, right? Because when I started in 1987, and I became a member of the at the time, which was the CAW, which is the Canadian version of the UAW, which is the United Auto Workers, right? And back in the 80s, the union was still very strong. It was, looking out for workers. The move towards the defanging of unions had really, for the most part, started yet, right? So the wages were good, the benefits were very good, and we've seen since then the erosion of workers' rights with the rise of, especially in the U.S., right to work states and all of this stuff that's happening. So working for a large corporation just on its own was absolutely horrid, right? Because you see from within the decision-making process and the us versus them mentality that at the time there were Japanese corporations that were doing a more friendly work environment where the management and the workers were more integrally working together for the betterment of the people in the plant and to make a better working environment. And it just seemed to be the complete opposite, that it was moving away from that in the automotive plant that I worked in, right? And so when I started at General Motors in Oshawa, Ontario, there was about 25,000 blue-collared employees, so workers, unionized workers in that. When I retired in 2017, there were just over 1,300. And since then, the plant has basically shut down.
That's incredible. That's and I remember working early on in my career for a massive multinational corporation that was headquartered in Ohio and then moved to Atlanta. And when I started, there were 156,000 employees. By the time I left, it was down to about just over 100,000 employees. So it doesn't sound like that much of a shift, but that's a massive departure of employees. And we only had union membership from some of the tech workers, a very small portion of the repair tech workers. Everyone else was so encouraged to not unionize, that it would hurt us, that we would lose benefits. Meanwhile, when I started, you had a pension fund that ended for new employees. And I remember the older workers going, well, you'll survive. You're young enough. Don't worry about it. And we would say to them, well, we recognize that we may be able to work longer and that sort of thing. But what about you? They're coming for you next. And that's exactly what happened. Within just a few years, you had the company make the announcement for the older workers that the pension was ending, and they lost their shit. And we were like, see, when you divide us, when you're not with us, when you're not fighting for us, what can we do for you now? Because they were losing their pensions too. So this was a big company, just as big as the one you worked for, without union representation. And it was every man for themselves. And, I, as a little person, I can't fight the big company. I still had to pay a mortgage. I had a kid to raise. What was I supposed to do? But this is kind of where the power of we comes in. And this is part of what we're seeing in this fight in California. So we just had our very special guest join us this morning. So I want to make sure to get him introduced, and we'll do our sound check on the fly. Randy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. You got no video. What's going on? We want to see the bedhead.
I've been on calls already this morning, and
okay.
I haven't had a chance to, I guess, get cleaned up, right? So
you know what? We're still having our coffee. I have COVID hair. I've managed to get one haircut all year, and you can see I now look like a pioneer. So yeah, just turn your camera on. We're all friendly here. There you go.
All right. You're fine.
Oh, there you go. Nice.
You look better than us.
That's true. Well, he's in California, so I think that's kind of part and parcel to it. So.
Oh no! I mean, I get, obviously we have our headquarters in Washington D.C., so my stuff starts pretty early sometimes. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but.
So, tell our audience who you are, who you represent, and why the hell they should care about the work that you're doing.
My name is Randy Korgan. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of Teamsters Local 1932 in Southern California, which is about 14,000 members that we represent primarily through San Bernardino County, and which is the largest county, one of the largest counties in the United States. And we're doing a ton of work in the Inland Empire in Southern California, obviously for worker advocacy around, making sure that workers are represented, the community understands the connection with unions, the community understands the benefit of unions. The greater community has benefited as a result of unions work for more than 100 years. And I think there's been such a pretty big message, anti-union message over the last 30, 40 years that most people forget that the weekends, healthcare, retirement issues, working conditions, that all those things were, really brought by unions, which, are a group of workers that are coming together asking for a little bit more. And so we're kind of expanding on that and getting back to some basics from about 70, 80 years ago. And we're having a lot of fun with it and engaging. Well, in California, we also got a lot of measures on the ballot because, corporate interests are obviously looking to try to take control of some of these situations. And we're basically having to beat all those back. Even in California, everybody thinks, well, California's got this blue wall built around it. And, it's got everything that we want. Well, no, we've got our own little wars going on inside California as well, because there's a tremendous amount of money on corporate America's side. And we're doing everything we can to keep the counterbalance there for working people, for everyday working people. If it wasn't for a lot of the things the unions have done the last 100 years, we'd probably still be what was considered a third world nation. And there'd still be, the exploitation and a lot of the areas of workers that were stomped out in the 40s and 50s. And so, we're just trying to carry that on. Hopefully that's a pretty good introduction.
It is, but I got to push back just a little bit, Randy. Free market. If you leave the free market alone, these businesses will realize that they need to take care of their employees and do the right thing. Isn't that what you see?
Sure. I mean, that's what they say. But I think every time we've allowed corporate America to run on an issue or kind of, let's use any regulatory factor that's been rolled back. Let's look at regulations. Whenever you hear somebody say, oh, we need to roll back your regulations, there should be an equal sign after it that then says workers lose. Because, regulations were usually put in play to protect somebody. I mean, corporations have killed people. Look, I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to exaggerate. They've killed people for a few hundred years, not just 100 years, not just 200 years. at the expense of building a railroad, at the expense of, putting stuff in the ground, at the expense of making some cars, safety factors and healthcare issues, and just trying to take care of working people. Corporations, when left to their own devices and the free market, look what they do. If you look at what they do in countries that have no regulations, they're doing what they did here in America in the 1920s. So, the free market, that's what they say. I can hear the message. I've been hearing the message my entire life, but most companies do not. Now, I can't say all companies, but the vast majority of them cannot help themselves. They look at the opportunity to exploit people, and they just want to make more and more and more money.
So this is interesting to me because I just moved from Illinois, which is supposed to be a blue state. It's one of those blue border states and everything should be okay. But that was the home of the Jandas decision. That was the home of, you've got the Koch brothers everywhere. They're using it as a petri dish in Illinois. And you have Democrats just kind of, it's okay. So what you have now in the city of Chicago is this TIF situation where we're giving corporations our tax dollars, property tax dollars. So that all externality cost is being passed on to employees and citizens. So where I live, we had a corporation come in and say, we want to expand. And we promised to make 150 jobs out of this. And my little village said, okay, we'll give you a TIF district. So I personally had paid their property taxes. But when I asked, did they create the 150 jobs? I got this slack jawed, what do you mean? I'm like, did you not check? Because I knew that the jobs they did create, which were about 30 of them, were temporary workers. And what they were doing was hiring these people on, and at the end of that contract, firing them and just churning in a new bunch. So no benefits, no protections whatsoever, but yet they were taking my taxes. And I love how people on the right always like to use the excuse, you're stealing from our children. Well, that is an example of where our property taxes are coming as an externality cost for me, and you are literally stealing from our schools. But we allow that.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because this has been in our wheelhouse for quite some time. The great American robbery has been what's gone on with local tax dollars over the last 20 years. They come in, they get these tax breaks, infrastructure breaks, sales tax incentives, redirection of sales tax. And, the average citizen walks up to a Bass Pro Shop, buys something, and then, sees the sales tax line at the bottom at 8% or 9% or whatever the sales tax for that area is, thinks that sales tax is going to the city and to the state or wherever it's supposed to go. And a lot of times half of that sales tax is actually going to the developer. It's going back to Bass Pro Shop. And what's the reason why this has happened, and the reason why, whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican, because I believe whether you're a D, R, or I, it doesn't really matter. Most people, if they understood what's happening in their city councils, if they're understood what's happening in their local governments, they wouldn't be allowing this, because what's happening is those developers are selling a bill of goods, saying, hey, we're going to create 100 jobs, 500 jobs, like the Foxconn situation in Wisconsin. One of the great American robberies was what Scott Walker did in Wisconsin at taking away public sector bargaining, taking away wages and benefits from public sector workers. He then took those billions of dollars and just gave them to Foxconn. And then what Foxconn promised obviously didn't deliver on it. And that has been the great American robbery over the last 20 or 30 years. At the end of the day, this is happening in every city in America. Almost every mall that goes up has got this sort of, sales tax diversion system, has got property tax diversion, it's got all these incentives and breaks. Where it's almost like we're begging for these jobs to come. And what we've done, we've actually done a bunch of research in this area over the last few years, and we found QVC. I'm sure everybody knows who QVC is. QVC dropped down in the city of Ontario near us, and their deal was the equivalent of a $500 million sales tax giveaway over a 20-year period. You heard that correctly, $500 million. they're saying, oh, well, if we didn't do that, the city's excuse was if we didn't do that, well, then they would have gone to Nevada. They'd have gone somewhere else. Well, let them go somewhere else. Like at the end of the day, would everybody stop undermining each other? Would everybody stop giving away the farm? Because what you're doing is you're taking out of the local resources. You're taking that out of someone else's pockets. You're having the middle class or, homeowners actually pay the taxes and you're not paying yours. And at the end of the day, they're saying, oh, we're going to have 150 jobs, 200 jobs. There's no mechanism. There's no regulation, the big boo-boo out. There's no regulation that holds that entity accountable when they try to promise, oh, we're going to have 100 jobs, 200 jobs, 400 jobs. And keep in mind, the fastest growing workforce in the last 10 years since the last recession has been the contingent workforce, temporary, part-time, subcontractors. Like it's by far the largest workforce. And that's because corporate America wants it, to take away their responsibilities, drain the coffers of whatever, unemployment, Social Security, all of the things that have been put in play to have pooled protectionism for workers. People want to call that socialism. And I always, my friends or people that I know that are cops, I ask them, hey, man, are you for socialism? No. Well, then you should quit. Like the
That's
reality
exactly right.
is there's people have made certain words like they're, oh, the boogeyman's coming. But the reality, it's, having schools, having roads, having a city, having an entity that houses a place to make sure that when you turn on the faucet, the water actually comes out. Or when you flush the toilet, the stuff goes where it's supposed to go. Like those infrastructures were built and financed as a result of social programs. It's not a bad thing, but corporate America wants to divide the middle class, get people to be afraid of each other, yell at each other, be mad about issues that don't really impact them, while they do the great American robbery and steal all of our local tax money.
Oh, I love that you brought that up, because we actually published an article about this kind of pushback in upstate New York. There was a company, same as in Illinois, and they're all over the place, a big pharmaceutical company who did that exact same thing. If you don't offset our taxes or you don't have a tax abatement for us, we're going to leave. And there was a Democratic state rep who started this entire campaign, T-shirts and everything, that said, pay your damn taxes. And they went after the company. And what actually happened is the company backed down and backed away from their threats, and is still in the area and is actually working now with the citizens because somebody had a backbone to stand up. So let's pivot just a little bit. So now that we've set the stage, so this argument and this conversation affects everyone, let's talk a little bit about Prop 22. So we had here, Andy and I had talked at length about when you have the Supreme Court argument and people are freaking out about justices and interpretations, that the antidote to that, or what should precede all of that, is good lawmaking. And with Prop 22, we saw that judges have ruled, and we just had a ruling last week against corporations in favor of employees. So what the corporations have done is try to get a new law passed through a ballot initiative. Would you say that that's correct?
Yeah, they're trying to get a carve out. That's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to get an exception to the rule for just them.
So explain for people who don't really know what they're trying to do with Prop 22. We know that the differentiation in employment law between a contractor and an employee has something to do with a measure of guidance and what autonomy that person has. Like if I'm an expert consultant and I can just come in and do my job, I'm not necessarily an employee. So explain this for people who maybe don't get the nuance.
So interestingly enough, I was one of the individuals almost 30 years ago that worked on an organizing campaign that kind of broke the ground on this with different employers, which is deeming them to be independent contractors for the purposes of collective bargaining so that they can organize. And there's some tests in there that are very simple in a way of explaining it. So let's use Amazon as an example right now, because everybody sees these Amazon vans coming out of nowhere, right? They're all over the place. Most of those people driving Amazon vans don't work for Amazon. They actually work for a contractor, a DSP. And the reason I use Amazon is because everybody knows what Amazon is. Heck, probably everybody gets a package delivered by them, right? So you look at that company and you think, oh, okay, well, those are Amazon drivers. Technically, they're not Amazon drivers. So Amazon's not responsible for what's going on there. And the tests are, how much control does ultimately the brand have over the delivery or the conditions of work that employee is being employed in? Shirt, what the van looks like, when they report to work, when they leave, how they take their breaks and lunches, where the supervision comes from. And when a single employer, in this case, like Amazon or Uber, Lyft, in the conditions of Prop 22, have almost complete control over how you're managing your day-to-day operation, and you're spending almost if not all of your time, and most of the time it's 100% of your time working for that single employer, you're an employee. You're not a subcontractor. And so let's go back in history. Drivers, the good thing about the Teamsters is, we have been on this journey with drivers for more than 100 years. We've represented drivers since there were reins in the driver's hands and there were horses in front of them when they were moving buggies. It's still in our logo. And we're proud of that history because we have transcended all of those technological changes over the last 100 years. We have been that advocate for drivers. We have been that advocate for cab drivers, for couriers, for delivery drivers. We have been right there side by side, helping create the Department of Transportation, helping create all these rules and regulations to prevent somebody from having to drive 100 hours a week, falling asleep while a big rig's driving down the road and killing an entire family, which is what we've gone through, and ironically, which is what we're spinning back towards. And so, 70, 80 years ago, almost every driver or every employee in that industry was an independent contractor, and it was very low paid. The working conditions were extremely difficult, and people could not make ends meet. So, clearly after us organizing the industry and then helping regulate the industry, we were able to improve the industry over a long period of time. So Prop 22 and issues in this industry are very near and dear to us because obviously we have been on this journey with these workers for more than 100 years. And so Prop 22 is they're trying to create a carve out law. So here you got the law of the land under the National Labor Relations Board, which is a federal law. And then at the state level, the state of California, we pressed the state of California to get a little bit more assertive on making sure that independent contractors and the abuse of that status doesn't continue to accelerate. So AB 5 was passed. Once AB 5 was passed a couple years ago, that's where Prop 22's come about. Uber and Lyft have now spent over $200 million to get a carve out on the law, an exception in the law. So the reason why everybody should pay attention to this across the country, regardless if you live in California or not, is if they pull this off and are able to get a carve out on the law, every industry is going to be subject to this by a few wealthy people. You brought up the Koch brothers earlier. You brought up some of these super wealthy individuals. I mean, how quick is it? How easy is it for them to dump a few $100 million in, go state by state and start rolling out these propositions that create carve outs in almost every single industry. And then guess what we're stuck with? Now we're stuck with everybody being independent contractors. And the problem with that comes with, no one's paying their unemployment. No one's paying, their benefits obviously have to be self-sustained. Their workman's comp, getting hurt on the job, Social Security, all of the basic security provisions in which workers have kind of come accustomed to in in the United States there's a shiny little object in front of them. Oh, you could be your own boss. So let me use another statistic that compares the situation. In the last 30 years, workers having a defined pension. And when I jumped on this call, I heard you talking about pensions, which is a really important subject because when you look at the statistics, the factual statistics of this, it's scary as hell. 50 years ago, almost 80% of workers had a defined benefit provided by their employer. They had a pension. Today, that number, you fast forward to 2020, that number is somewhere around 12%, only 13%. And so more than 80% of workers have to depend on a 401k type of system for their retirement. And so obviously people that are impacted by the Prop 22 campaign or by that initiative are just as affected by these statistics. And this is why this statistic is so important, is out of the 80% of people that have a 401k as their primary source of retirement. Now, the original drafters of the 401k language came out 2 years ago and they openly said they were disgusted by its use of how the 401k has now become the primary retirement vehicle. They actually said the reason why they built it was a supplemental to retirement, not the primary retirement vehicle. Once again, the free market has created a situation where this is now the rule. So now look at the statistics of how people retire under a 401k system. Out of the 80% of people that are working that qualify to participate in a 401k, if we assume that they all participate in it, which they don't, but let's assume for statistical reasons that they all participate in the 401k, more than 80% of those have to draw it down to zero before they retire because of a death in the family, or because of a death, because of a healthcare issue, or a plant shutdown, or a loss of job. So more than 80% of them. So when you take that, you carve all those numbers out, you have essentially less than 20% of the population with a retirement vehicle. And so now when you push everybody under a subcontractor, independent contractor system, like what's in Prop 22, you start stacking these situations on top of each other. What are people going to do when they punch the golden ticket, at the time of retirement? What's going to happen?
Well, wait a second. Let's not forget that a 401k is still a casino bet, right? I mean, I saw my own 401k lose 60% of its value in 2007, 2008. And the market is so volatile right now and continuing that I cannot plan for retirement on a 401k. But I want to shift just a little bit into the counter argument that Uber and Lyft and Instacart and all of these contract kind of scenario companies are making in favor of Prop 22. So you touched on a little bit, you can be your own boss. And even some of the drivers are saying, like my autonomy. Well, autonomy itself does not necessarily go away under worker protections. It is kind of one of the lies that we see coming out of the argument for Prop 22. So Andy, I forwarded you some tweets from Vanessa Bain, and she's an Instacart shopper, and she brought up some highlights here, some of the discrepancy and what the company is actually doing against workers who are not in favor of Prop 22 and how they are using their own ability to forward Prop 22 to California voters. So in the first tweet, Vanessa talks about how it's requiring shoppers who are uncompensated for their work to distribute Prop 22 propaganda to customers against our own self-interest. And she says, even if, a big if, this is legal, it is reprehensible and establish a dangerous precedent for workers. So then she goes on to talk about how the company itself told them that when they did a flyering campaign aimed at customers between service and tip, trying to explain that, teaching them about how their pay has changed under Instacart's policy, the company prohibited them from doing those flyers under a safety guideline. Yet now they're requiring that same flyering by drivers in favor of Prop 22. So we see this whole discrepancy. And I'm not sure about the law in California when it comes to electioneering and things like this, but can they use their own drivers who may not support Prop 22 to forward propaganda and literature for Prop 22?
Hey, we live in the United States of America that, you got freedom of speech until you go to work. Reality is what people don't realize is that could be the law, but it doesn't matter what the law is. These corporations and these businesses are going to argue both sides to their benefit, and they always have, and they always will. It is not going to change anytime soon, especially when you have that much money and that much influence. It is, in some ways, it is a violation of law. It's a gray area. At the end of the day, they don't care. They're gonna try to win this. I'm an Instacart customer, and so I've been subject to exactly what you're referring to. And so, at the end of the day, what we got to do is, as working people, as everyday middle class people, is we got to just have that conversation, and we got to explain to that worker, hey, this is what's going on. Because of course you have a bunch of people that work for, Uber and Lyft and Instacart and all these institutions where they're saying, oh, yeah, I'm good with it. Of course they're going to say that. That's currently who's cutting their check, number one. And number two, if they don't understand the rules of the system and what could be negotiated under collective bargaining agreement or what the potential is, that's all that they know. So at the end of the day, yeah, I'm good with this for right now. Most of those jobs and quite frankly, most of the commercials we see where they say they have these drivers supporting it, they're actually actors. We're the ones that have been getting the real drivers out and actually talking about Prop 22 and why they're not supportive of it. And so at the end of the day, it's just employer suppression. It's been going on for, since the beginning of time. Of course, most people are going to be like, well, my employer says to go left, I'm going to go left. Because we're brought up in school to be, obedient and don't rock the boat and kind of work with everybody. And you're not allowed to revolt.
Yeah, fall in line. So real quick, this is a great question to kind of wrap things up with. Jeffrey, who is watching. Hi, Jeffrey. Good morning. He says, Jeffrey's out of Indiana, and he said, local movers here used to be a part of the Teamsters Union, but they have all been snubbed out. And we've seen that time and time again with union workers. He wants me to ask you about getting established again with the Teamsters in his state and in other states. How do people get involved with the Teamsters and join your union?
The first thing they need to do is obviously depends on some issues with the work group. But the first thing got to do is pick up the phone, call the local union. I know for us, you can just go to teamsterslocal1932.org and we will connect you to your local union in your area, or you can go to teamsters.org and they will do the same thing. But is pick up the phone, give the local union a call and organize your place of employment. That is, an interesting point. I think it was Jeffrey that brought it up. You said is most workers are not aware in today's day that you can unionize and you can organize. And if you look at what's going on in today's climate and you see, millions of people kind of saying, hey, there's a bit of an imbalance here right now. If you look back at collective bargaining from 1935 to 1965, the gap of inequality for color, for women, for any sort of exploitation was closed more between 1935 and 1965 than it has between 65 and today. And the reason why that happened is because unionization was almost 40% in 1965. And as a result of almost half the population having a collective bargaining agreement, it created a balance. It created a balance across industries to prevent exploitation, to prevent someone from saying, Kerri, you're a woman, I'm going to pay you less. You know what, Johnny, you're black, I'm going to pay you less. The Teamsters Union was one of the first unions, if not the first union, to have colorblind contracts and to have gender blind contracts and to take a position in the early 1900s, 1911, 1917. Hey, we're going to welcome everybody into our organization and everybody's going to be paid equally because everybody's working the same place and there's no reason to be paying people different. So what the individual can do is pick up the phone, find a Teamster local in their area, look to start to organize them, get a couple of your workers together and identify if you have some common interest and figure out what you need to have in a collective bargaining agreement. Because, what's wrong with having your employer? It's not that you hate your employer. You want to just make sure you have a guarantee. Your employer has contracts with their customers with whom they're doing business with. Why don't you have a contract with your employer? Because you haven't, you have something you're giving them, which is your work and your labor every day. So have a contract with your employer to make sure that those terms and conditions are fair and balanced over the term of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. So hopefully that answers the question. That's what he can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So on Prop 22, it's a vote no?
Yeah, it's absolutely no on 22. If a yes passes, we're going to see that, rip through the United States, and you're going to see carve outs all over the place. And that's a very dangerous place to be, to give that much power to corporate America.
Perfect. Excellent. And Andy, once again, I've dominated the conversation. Do you have any final thoughts for our lovely guest here?
No, I just draw on my own experiences and I think that being a Canadian, that their society has allowed unions to be somewhat stronger and being able to keep a lot of the union initiatives that were gained through North America over the years, right? It's been initiatives like the right to work in certain states and the demonization of unions over the last period of time that has by capital that has made life just horrible. That the powers that be and the local politicians and the billionaire class have been able to demonize unions to the point where the only friend that workers have in society is unions, and you're not allowed to trust them. You're not supposed to trust them anymore because they don't have your back in this situation, when really they are your only, especially now in the unfettered capitalist society that is the United States. And I just find that appalling, right? There's one thing that I wanted to mention is that Pavlina Chernova, in a conversation with her just recently in the state of New York, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion in tax breaks was promised to Amazon so they could set up a major warehouse in that state. And that money could have paid for a jobs guarantee program for all unemployed New Yorkers in that state for a year, right? That's the kind of enemy that we're dealing with, right? When we look towards capital and capitalism to cure everything with a market, it's not. It can't do that. It's a capitalist. The private sector is profit driven. They're not worried about the workers, right? That's where unions have to take up that gap. And we need to work towards strengthening our unions and expanding them to where they were, or else it's just not going to end well.
No, it's not. And 40% is not a lot of the workforce. And look at the sweeping improvements we were able to make with our parents' generation and prior. So it behooves everyone to at least consider the field that you're in. There's a union that represents you in whatever work you're doing, whatever industry you're in. Go and see about it. And the thing I love about unions that I hate about politics is it's a hell of a lot easier to run for office as a senior representative in your union than it is to run for Congress, right? So when people complain about, well, I don't like my union, run for office, run for representative, get involved. And it's so much easier in a union, which is the core of a democracy, an example of a democratic organization. Do that, improve it, change it. And it is far easier to do than changing, my previous congressman who is not leaning left, even though he's wearing a blue jumpsuit. So yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. So Randy, thank you so much for joining us, for getting up early with us and your colleagues in DC, and really taking the time to explain this and why people should care about what's happening in California, across the country, and why the Teamsters are out in front of all of this. So thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Perfect. So Andy, any final thoughts?
No, I'm good. I really, I think this is such an important thing that you and I discussed this, that California, what happens in California on this will sweep across the country, right? And the unions have been defanged so much in the last little while that we at least have to hold on to what we have now, or things are just going to, especially during a pandemic when people's healthcare are tied to their jobs, right? That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, Andy, you pointed out something regarding, this, how unions have been perceived recently. And the reality is, unions have been demonized and somehow we're the villain. The amazing thing is what I love so much about my job and what I've been doing for the time that I've been fortunate enough to do it, is that we're walking side by side with working people every single day, and we're helping individuals, gain good healthcare, retirement healthcare, retirement vehicles, working conditions, raises, changing, their work environment in a positive way with their input, and a lot of times making their employer more productive as a result of those conversations. And the statistics have shown that union workers are far more productive than non-union workers for all the things in which I just listed. And so for the last more than 100 years, we've been on this journey with working people, and unions aren't these institutions that the corporations want to villainize. They're everyday working people. They coach baseball. They're the nurses. They're the police officers. They're the person that answers the dispatch when they dial 911. They're the person that's there to help you. They deliver food to your children's school. Union workers are part of our community, part of our everyday environment. And for some reason, we've all been villainized for corporate profit. And so we just got to wake everybody up and say, hey, let's just get to the basics and kind of work together, that we can make America great by working together and helping one another. That's how it works.
Absolutely.
Beautifully said. And so for everyone who's watching, thank you for those who weighed in with your comments. All the comments are just like right, totally in agreement with you. So we love to see that. So you can do something a little bit more. Share this broadcast with your friends and family, particularly those who are in California who are weighing their options on Prop 22. Convince them that voting no is the way to go. And then for everyone else, seriously, consider looking at a union for membership. If not membership, then support them, because they support all workers across our country. And this is where we talk about all of us or none. They divide us. Guess what's going to happen? We're on our own. So that's it for us here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Andy, any closing thoughts?
Just wanted to emphasize that look at a couple of years ago, what the teachers were able to accomplish on their own. How they stood up to the state and the governors in their states and the representatives, and they actually got real gains for themselves. That's what a union does. That's what the strength of people getting together for a common cause. Because ultimately, what do we have as workers? We got the numbers.
Beautifully said. So thank you everyone for tuning in to this important broadcast. And we will be back here on Friday live, bright and early, same time. And we will get to all of your comments and questions. If you have a topic that you want us to cover, something you're not real familiar with, want to know more about, or you think is really important for everyone else to hear, drop us a line, send us a message on Facebook, on Twitter. We're on Twitch. We're on Daily Mail. We have a website. We have email. All of these channels are available to you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on Friday.
We bout that, we in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Habit the dog, we keep it neat.